Well, last night I went out to a restaurant with some friends of mine, and if I was to draw a diagram of the communication that we had, I would say that it would look something like this. Now, if I look at this, it's very random, it's illogical in some ways, and it's certainly unstructured. So when we began to talk about a point here, and then we went across here, and then we went to another point here, and then we jumped back to here, and then we came here, and it really didn't matter. Because the aim of this kind of social conversation is really about maintaining and building relationships that we have. Now, if I compare this to business communication, the diagram would look very different. So, for example, last week I went to a business meeting, and if I was to draw a diagram of this communication, it would look something like this. Now, this is a ladder, and a ladder is about going step by step by step. It's very linear, and it's quite structured, and it's quite logical in many ways. You go from the first step to the second step to the third step. And this is the way business communication works. And the business communication, it wouldn't matter if it's a presentation or a meeting, a negotiation, or writing, whether you're writing an email or a formal report. Because business communication has a different kind of aim. It's about setting an action plan, it's about making decisions, it's about reaching conclusions. In the bottom line, it's about getting the business done. So one of the issues when we start to learn business English is that very often in business English, when we're talking about these tools of communication, these meetings and these presentations and these negotiations, then what we're talking about is using this ladder-like construction rather than the random construction. And this can be a change in moving from general English to business English. Now, the really good news about this is, in some ways, it's very simple. And the technique that we're using is called sequencing. And sequencing is all about putting your ideas into a flow. It's about arranging your ideas in a structure and putting them into some logical progression of the ideas so that it's coherent and it's concise and it's effective. Now, the good news about sequencing is that there's certain language that we use in order to indicate our sequencing and to make the sequencing clear either to our readers or to our listeners. Now, this is not difficult, and these phrases you can learn and you can pick them up, and maybe you know many of them already. The skill of sequencing, though, or maybe the art of sequencing, though, is this ability to organize your ideas and put them into some kind of logical progression. And this is really where the skill of sequencing comes in. It's much more than just learning a few phrases. And like anything else in life, the more that you practice it and the more that you do it, you'll find the easier it gets. And if you develop your skills of sequencing, first of all, this will improve your business English. It will improve your communication, not only in the business world, but also in the academic world, because you'll be able to put your ideas across coherently, logically, and relevantly to your audiences. You'll be much more effective and much more concise in your communication. And as a result, this will improve your overall performance. You'll find that when you do exams, that you'll begin to get better grades because of this structure that you've put into information and your ability to express your structure. And also, when you get out into the business world, you'll find that you're giving a much better impression to your colleagues and to your bosses. So what we're going to do in this video is look at sequencing. And first of all, we're going to look at what sequencing is, how structure works. Then we're going to look at expressing this structure. And then we'll go on to, well, structuring the information. The big question you have is probably, well, how do I structure information? So let's get started. So if we come back to our diagram of the ladder and the idea of linear communication, well, let's have a look at this ladder and see the different parts of the ladder when it comes to business communication. So in any kind of communication, and again, this doesn't matter if it's a presentation or a report or a meeting, there'll be some kind of introduction. And in the introduction, we often set the stage. We often give an overview of what people can expect. And as soon as I do this, people begin to structure the oncoming communication in their heads. And again, this is helping with your communication. Then there's a main body to the communication, and then we have to structure our content within the main body. And then at the end, very often, especially if it's a longer communication, there is some kind of summary of all the ideas that we've had in the communication, and then there's some kind of conclusion. This could be recommendations, it could be an action plan, it could be some kind of conclusion, it could be making the decision. So when it comes to dividing up the main body, then the main body has this natural progression. So there'll be different ideas or different agenda points. So item 1, item 2, and item 3. So let's look at the language to do with this. So what we need in order to express this progression and make the progression clear to somebody, whether they're listening to us or whether they're reading our writing, what we need is some kind of transition. Now, transitions, they occur in different forms. They can be verbally. So in a presentation, I would say something like, moving on to my next point now. That's all I wanted to say about point 3, and now I'd like to tell you about point 4. Or they could be in writing, and in writing they can, especially if it's formal reports, they can be more formal. So instead of saying next, maybe we write down subsequently, and we've got things like following and furthermore, and so on and so on. And also, we should also think that transitions, they're also visual. And I can communicate my transitions in a visual way. There are a couple of ideas that I've got about this. So one would be, for example, in a presentation. Some people, for example, will clearly number the different points of their presentation on their presentation slides or their visual information, or they'll actually number the slides, or they use different headings on their slides in different ways in order to indicate their structure. If we think about writing, if we think about a report, then, well, first of all, when we're writing, first of all, structure is given. If I look at the page, I can see the paragraphs, and I can see writing, and I can see white space. This is giving me some kind of structure. If I'm writing a report, then I might have sections, and then subsections, and then bullet points. This is some kind of visual transition. So let's have a look at some of these verbal transitions. And again, as I say, you may know many of these, and I would encourage you, when you're practicing your business communication, whether that's in writing or in speaking, to try and build up the transitions and to use variety in the transitions that you use. So let's have a look at these. So at the beginning, I've got things like firstly, the first point is, initially. That is something I might use more in writing. The initial topic, let's start with, let's begin with. And then the second point has a kind of parallel. So I've got things like secondly. In a report, I can just simply number things. Next, the next point is, moving on now to, let's shift our focus to. And again, another parallel with the third point. Thirdly, I mentioned before, next, another word is subsequently in formal English. Then the next step, the next action, following this, afterwards, additionally, in addition. And then coming to the end of our communication, I've got little transitions like finally, lastly, to summarize, in summary, to sum up, to recap, and to give conclusions, in conclusion, to conclude. In structuring my information, if I move along to the left-hand side, I might want to say things or give information at the same time. So I've got transitions like at the same time, simultaneously, meanwhile. And if I want to contrast information, then there are transitions like on the other hand, on the contrary, in contrast. These are the steps of first steps of sequencing. It's thinking about using a ladder kind of structure, using introduction, main body, points 1, 2, 3, and then conclusion and recommendations. Linguistically, as I said, these transitions are not too difficult, and you may know already many of the phrases. I think the difficulty and the skill in sequencing comes much more in structuring this information. So let's have a look at, and I want to give you some ideas of how to structure information. So let's look at, first of all, the concept of the progression of ideas. And there are some things that we talk about in life and in business English. They have a natural progression of ideas. So let's have a look at some examples of this. So the first thing would be when you're talking about any kind of process. A process has a sequence. So for example, here in my first example, there are 4 key steps in our quality control process. We are going to examine 1, inspection, 2, analysis, 3, testing, and 4, reporting. Or another process would be the process of feedback. So feedback is integral. First, we gather input. Second, we analyze it. Third, we make adjustments. And then finally, repeat the cycle. Another natural progression or a natural sequence would be giving instructions. There'd be step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So instructions. Firstly, open the box. Secondly, remove the contents. Thirdly, check the contents. A meeting or a business discussion can have a natural progression of ideas in order for us to make the decision that we have to have. So for example, here I've got the discussion will the discussion will evolve from the general concepts to the specific case studies. So moving from the general to the specific. In writing a report, to show the steps that I'm going to follow in the report. To achieve our marketing objectives, sequential steps are followed. The initial first step is research. Subsequently, next, there is strategy development, followed by execution, and finally, evaluation. And again, in spoken English, in a presentation, so let me give an overview of the presentation. Any presentation should have a structure. We'll start with the background information, followed by the key findings, and then finish with my recommendations. So here we're talking about natural progressions and natural processes that invite you in some ways to come up with these sequences. So let's have a look at some other structures that we can also use that have some kind of, again, natural progression, natural sequence of ideas or of thinking. And the first thing I'd like to do is look at a timeline. Now, timelines naturally have a sequence. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. This is a sequence. And we can use this in, again, using sequencing and structuring our ideas. So when I have projects have natural timelines. So in my first example, first let's discuss the project's initial planning phase. Next, we'll move on to the execution phase. Finally, we'll recover the results and the lessons learned. A natural timeline. You can give actual dates. In the timeline, you can see that the project started in January, followed by a testing phase in March, and the final product launch in June. Another very natural progression is to talk about the past and the present and the future. This has a natural timeline, which is a sequence. I would like to tell you about our company. Firstly, I'll talk about the foundation, then I'll go on to outline our current growth, and lastly, I'll look to the future. If I talk about development or evolution, this can also have a natural timeline. So for example, here we've got to understand the evolution of technology. We'll explore key inventions in chronological order. So first of all, what happened in 1900, then 1910, then 1930, and so on and so on. Natural timelines, natural sequences. Okay, so let's look at the next example. And my next example is to look at things in order of priority or in order of importance. So I can go from the thing that's most urgent to the least urgent, or again, the least urgent to the most urgent, depending on which order suits my final objectives. I can go from the most important to the least important, or I can go from the least important to the most important. And again, by using this structure, again, I'm beginning to put my things into a logical order and I'm helping my communication. Let's look at some examples. I'll outline our objectives in order of priority. Firstly, our top priority is safety. Then I'll go on to customer satisfaction. And lastly, I'll deal with cost efficiency. When considering new features for this product, we need to rank them in order of importance to users. And then in writing again, in this section of the report, the necessary action is outlined, starting with the most urgent action and finishing with the least urgent. So what do we need to do? Firstly, and most importantly, we need to inform the customers. Then we must recall the product as soon as possible. And finally, we should examine our production processes. My next example is to compare and contrast information. So here we've got advantages and disadvantages, or drawbacks and benefits in my first two examples. Now let's compare the advantages and the disadvantages of the three software solutions. Firstly, we'll discuss solution A, followed by analysis of solution B, and then move on to solution C. And again, twice here you've got sequencing. You've got advantages and disadvantages, and then you've got a natural sequence with A, B, C. And again, if I've got advantages and disadvantages, a variety I can use are drawbacks and benefits. My first point is to outline the drawbacks, then I'll move on to the benefits before finishing with the recommendations. Contrasting the performance of our products in different regions is essential. We'll begin with Europe, next we'll look at North America, and finally examine Asia. And then we've got best case and worst case. So let's explore two scenarios. First, we'll consider the best case scenario, and then we'll examine the worst case scenario. Now, another natural sequence that we've got in life is the idea of hierarchies of different kinds. And if I work in a company has a natural hierarchy. I've got my top CEO, then I've got my top managers, my junior managers, and so on and so on. And I can use hierarchies like this in my sequencing. So let me give you some examples again. So firstly, I'll talk about the executive board, next the depart managers, and then the individual teams. Visual sequencing. In writing, this report is organised, again with a hierarchy. This report is organised with sections, subsections and bullet points. And then sometimes there are hierarchies that we use. So a business tool would be Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So let's use this meeting to discuss the needs of our employees using Maslow's hierarchy of needs, going step by step from the bottom to the top. The last idea that I'd like to throw at you is the idea of using images to express our sequences. They can be really effective. Sequences can express by going down roads and using maps and using road maps. So I'll run through the roadmap of the project. Our starting point was the initial planning phase, then we moved through development and successfully reached our destination, the final implementation stage. Connected to roadmaps, we can have voyages, we can have travel. It's been and will continue to be a voyage of discovery. We successfully navigated the calm waters in Europe, then had some problems in the more turbulent waters in America, and are looking forward to exploring new territories in Asia. Let me expand. And again, connected to this, again, the ideas of journeys, travel. The customer journey is a sequence of interactions as he or she goes from awareness to purchase to loyalty. This report will consider each point of this journey. So this was sequencing. And sequencing is a really useful business skill. It will really help you both in your academic life and your business life. Sequencing is all about changing those random circles to some kind of linear ladder-like structure in your communication. It's about achieving a logical and coherent flow to your information that expresses clearly and effectively what you want to express and helps your readers and your listeners to understand your information. Sequencing has different aspects. One aspect is all about this ability and this skill to organize your information. As I said before, the more you do it, the easier it will become. If you can structure very quickly in a meeting situation your arguments into 3 clear points, for example, this will really help people to understand. It will understand your content, and if you're using English as a foreign language, everybody will be able to understand your language much better, and in addition, you'll create a much better impression. Some people in meetings will go on and on and on and repeat themselves, and you don't really understand the point of the communication. So when you use sequencing, you should really begin to, as I say, develop this skill. And there are different things that you need to think about. And one is the means of communication itself. There will be a difference, for example, between meetings and presentation. Negotiations have an accepted structure to them, or whether you're writing an email or a report, for example. And connected to this, you should also think about tone. In business, sometimes you'll need a quite formal tone. So if I'm writing a very formal business report, for example, or I'm giving a presentation to new customers, or sometimes I need a much more informal tone. So if I'm writing email to business partners that I've known for many years, or I'm giving a presentation to colleagues, for example. Then I really need to think, connected to this again, I need to think about the audience. And whether the audience are readers or whether they're listeners, I have to think about their needs and expectations. And I have to think about what those needs and expectations are, and that different audiences will need different approaches. And again, coming again to another connected point, then I need to think about what is the objective? What's the objective? What's the aim? What's the goals? What do I want to achieve with my communication? And make sure that anything that I put into my content is moving towards that aim or objective. This will really make my communication much more effective. It will be clear, it will be concise, it will be straightforward. It will be relevant. If I'm relevant, then I will keep people engaged, and I will keep people moving towards what it is I want to achieve with my communication. Irrelevant information, going off the point or putting in stuff that's not relevant, will lead my audiences to not be engaged, and it will lead to them being confused in many ways. So that's all I wanted to say in this video about sequencing. Practice sequencing, use sequencing in every steps of your business English course. This can only improve your business English skills. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.